Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic goblin noise!
Hey gang, using the promo code MTGMudsta, one word, all caps, will get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Flipside Gaming, Original Magic Art, and orders of singles at Multizone. If they don't have what you're looking for, you could check out TCG Player and use my affiliate link to help support the channel. Looking for a way to bling out your deck and not spend a fortune? Alter Sleaze can help with that, and you can help with the channel at the same time by using my affiliate link. Or, if you're looking to join the Goblin Gang, you can always support me through Patreon. Hey gang, just so you know, Flipside Gaming is doing a giveaway for a Kaldheim Draft Booster Box. By placing an order with my Flipside Gaming promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, you'll be entered to win. Alternatively, you can send a stamped, self-addressed envelope or postcard to Flipside Gaming to the address below. The contest will run from January 25th until February 8th. Only one entry per household, so good luck, and let me know what you get if you win. Today's game is another one featuring some of the Jersey Boys and filmed by Trevor. Of course, Trevor's in it, and he's playing Freyalise, Keeping Two Forests, Siege Behemoth, Soul Ring, Kadama's Reach, Fierce Empath, and a Wasteland. Mike is playing his Olivia, Mobilized for War, Keeping Graven Cairns, a Swamp, Scourge of the Throne, Victimize, Tormenting Voice, and a Mycosynth Wellspring. Scion has his Progenitus Lands Matter deck, keeping Teleria West, Atomic, Prismatic Omen, Terra Eternal, Vesuva, Amulet of Vigor, and a Sunscorched Desert. Matt is playing one of his favorite decks, the Super Scion, keeping Steam Vents, Bloodstained Mire, Haven of the Spirit Dragon, Polluted Delta, Frantic Search, Swords to Plowshares, and a Birds of Paradise. Sean wins the die roll and starts us off. Sean plays a Sunscorched Desert, which comes in, and he deals 1 to Matt. He then taps it for an Amulet of Vigor, passing. Trevor plays a Forest and casts a Soul Ring. Mike plays a Graven Cairns, passing turn. Matt takes 2 as he plays an untapped Breeding Pool and taps it for a green to cast Birds of Paradise. Sean plays a Vesuva, which as it comes in, has it become a copy of Trevor's Forest. It's untapped then thanks to Amulet of Vigor, and he then taps both lands for Prismatic Omen, passing. Trevor drops a Wasteland for turn, and pays 3 mana for Kadama's Reach. He goes to find a basic for the field, and a basic for his hand, and he passes to Mike while searching. Mike plays a Swamp, and does something similar, casting a Mycosynth Wellspring. As the artifact enters, he gets to go and find a basic for his hand, and he passes to Matt while searching. Matt has a Bloodstained Mire as his land drop, and doesn't want to waste time either, sacrificing it and losing 1 to go and find a land while passing as well. Sean's turn has him tapping 2 again, and he casts Tomic thanks to the Omen, allowing him to tap his lands for white mana. He then plays a Teleria West for turn, which normally would come in tapped, but thankfully is untapped by his Amulet. Trevor draws for turn and plays a Forest. He casts Freyalise in his main phase, and then upticks the Walker once she resolves to make an Elf token. Mike plays a Mountain, and taps 2 mana for a Tormenting Voice. He discards his Scourge of the Throne and draws 2 cards, passing to Matt. Matt plays a Steam Vents, and he takes 2 as it enters so it'll come in untapped, and he then passes to Sean. Sean draws and plays a Swamp. He taps 4 mana for Reap and Sow, and uses the spell to search for a specific land to the field. He passes while searching for a Maze's End. Trevor taps his Soul Ring and a Forest in his main phase, casting a Fierce Empath. It enters, and he gets to search for a creature card that costs 6 or more. He shortcuts first though, playing Cavern of Souls and naming Elf, and then upticks Freyalise to make an Elf token before going to go find the creature. Mike plays another Swamp, and taps 3 mana to get him a Buried Alive. In the meantime, Trevor is finished tutoring and reveals an Ulvenwald Hydra and puts it to hand. Mike then puts to graveyard his creatures, but sadly we only get to see the copy of Bogart and Hellkite on top, and he passes turn. At the end of turn, Matt casts a Frantic Search. he draws 2, and then discards the Ur-Dragon and Dragon Lord Kolaghan before untapping 3 lands and moving to his turn. Matt then draws for turn and plays a Plains. He then taps 1 of each color for his commander, Scion of the Ur-Dragon, and passes to Scion. Scion activates his Maze's End in his main phase and goes to find a Guildgate to put to the field. He grabs a Selesnya Guildgate, which comes in untapped thanks to the amulet. Since he had to return the Maze's End to his hand for part of activating it, Scion gets to replay it, which means it also comes back in tapped, but then gets untapped thanks to the amulet. Scion then plays a Sylvan Scrying to go and find a land to put to hand, and he grabs a Thespian Stage and passes to Trevor. Trevor pays 6 mana in his main phase for the Ulvenwald Hydra that he'd revealed earlier. It comes in and tutors for a land, with Trevor putting to field a tapped Gaia's Cradle. He then downticks Freyalise to use her ultimate and draws cards equal to the amount of green creatures he controls. His land for turn is then a Deserted Temple, which he activates to untap the Cradle. Tapping the Cradle nets him 4 mana, 3 of which goes into his Reclamation Sage. With the Sage coming in, he blows up Sean's Amulet of Vigor, but Mike suggests hitting the Wellspring. At this point, Sean has gone off camera to help a customer, and Trevor helps him out since it was the before time, putting Sean's amulet into his graveyard. He then hits Mike for 1 with the Empath, and passes to discard down to 7. Mike plays a Sulphurous Springs, and then pays 3 mana for Olivia mobilized for war. His 2 remaining mana gets him an Animate Dead, which brings back his earlier found Lord of the Void from the Buried Alive. As it enters, he discards a card to Olivia's trigger to give the Lord a +1/+1 counter and haste. He decides to swing it at Matt because who doesn't want free dragons? But Matt blocks with a Scion to prevent it, and with nothing else, Mike passes. Matt plays a Forest for turn, and his plan to use Scion is now in disarray from having to block, so he just passes to Sean. Sean untaps and draws. He plays Nissa Vital Force in his main phase, and plays a tapped Orzhov Guildgate. Sean then untaps the Teleria West with Nissa's first ability, and goes to combat. He swings Tomek, who has flying surprisingly, at Freyalise, and she gets taken out. Sean then passes to Trevor. Trevor's turn has him tapping some lands and his Elf Torques for a Thunderfoot Baloth. Its ability isn't active until he recasts his commander, which he does so. He then downticks Freyalise to blow up the Animate Dead on Mike's side, and the Lord of the Void gets put back into the graveyard. Trevor then goes to combat, and he hits Mike for 7 with his Empath and Sage, who have now been pumped thanks to the Thunderfoot Baloth. Mike taps 3 mana in his main phase to cast a Victimize, sacrificing Olivia. He brings back the Lord of the Void again, and a new friend who shares part of its name, a Void Winnower. Mike's done for turn since they come in tapped, and at the end of turn, Matt uses Path to Exile on the Void Winnower, which means it gets exiled and Mike has to go and find a tap basic. It's a mountain, and we then move to Matt's turn. Matt plays a Haven of the Spirit Dragon and taps 6 mana for Lathliss in his main phase. He keeps 1 mana open, passing to Sean. Sean untaps and draws. He downticks Nissa to get her emblem, and this lets him draw a card whenever he plays a land. He plays a Thespian Stage, which he puts into play tap for some reason, and draws a card. Sean then casts a Karmic Justice, and activates the Maze's End, and catches his mistake with the Stage when he returns the Maze's End to hand. Sean then finds a Dimir Guildgate, drawing as it enters after he's done shuffling, and passes to Trevor. Trevor upticks Freyalise in his main phase to make an elf token. He then taps enough for a Kindred Summons at sorcery speed, which is pretty bold. He decides to name Beast, and has just the Baloth on the field, meaning he only reveals off the top until he hits his first beast, hoping for the Craterhoof Behemoth. He begins revealing, stopping once he hits a Gravesifter. As it enters, he picks Elves while Matt picks Dragon, and Mike thinks about picking Dragon as well, but decides to just pick Elf because he wants to keep his stuff in his graveyard, which is very suspect. Trevor then drops out an Azuri, and he goes to combat. He swings the Baloth, the Elves, and the Hydra at Sean. Sean doesn't block and takes the full 24. Trevor then passes, and at the end of turn, Mike uses Victim of the Night and takes out Lathless to try and clear a way for his Lord of the Void. Responding to this removal, Matt uses some of his own, casting Swords to Plowshares to remove the Lord of the Void because he doesn't want his dragon stolen. With the Lord getting exiled to Swords, Mike gains a bit of life. Mike untaps and pays 6 mana for Ever After. He brings back the Boggart and Hellkite and the Scourge of Throne, which come back in as zombies in addition to their normal type of dragon. He then puts Ever After on the bottom of his library and resolves the Boggart and Trigger. He deals enough to take out Freyalise and has the rest go at Trevor's face. He then passes to Matt. Matt untaps and draws for turn. He plays a Polluted Delta, taking 1 and going to find a land as he sacrifices it. He finds a Blood Crypt, and as it enters, takes 2 so it comes in untapped. Matt then taps enough mana to cast Bladewing the Risen, who upon entering, brings back Lathless. He then passes to Scion with 1 blue open. Scion draws and looks at his graveyard. He plays a tapped Rakdos Guildgate, drawing as it enters. And we then see his copy of Ulvenwald Hydra hitting the stack. It resolves, and as it enters, goes to find Scion a land. He grabs a copy of Reflecting Pool, and draws as it enters. Scion then casts a Retreat to Hagra, and passes. Trevor's turn has him asking how big Scion's Hydra is, and Scion lets him know it's huge. Trevor then taps enough with just the Cradle to recast a Freyalise, and he upticks her to make a new elf token, and goes to combat. He swings the older elf tokens, the Gravesifter, the Sage, and the Empath at Scion, who continues to find Guildgates and inch closer to winning with Maze's End. Scion blocks the Sifter with the Hydra, and Tomek on the Fierce Empath. Doing some quick math, Trevor realizes with only 1 activation of Azuri, he's able to take Scion out, and taps the appropriate amount of mana to do so. He does lose the Gravesifter because of the Hydra blocking it, and in Trevor's second main phase, he plays a Forest, and taps enough for a Siege Behemoth. Mike plays an Exotic Orchard as his land for turn, and only has 1 card in hand. He calls for a truce with Matt, and extends an Olive Branch by using Terminate to take out Trevor's Ulvenwald Hydra. He then goes at Trevor, who isn't even on the throne at this point, and Trevor just takes the hits from the dragons. In Mike's second main phase, he recasts Olivia and passes to Matt. Matt draws and plays a Mountain. He taps enough for Dragonlord Kolaghan, which he'd returned to hand earlier thanks to the Gravesifter. This triggers Lathless, who makes him a Dragon token. He then pays 1 red and 1 black to activate Bladewing the Risen's ability, pumping all of his dragons by +1/+1 until end of turn. He then goes to combat, swinging everything at Trevor. This is 25 points of damage, but unfortunately for Matt and Mike, Trevor is able to hang on by a thread. Trevor draws for turn and upticks Freyalise to make a token. He then plays a Forest for turn and taps his Cradle for a lot of green mana. He then untaps it using the Deserted Temple and taps it again for even more. They do some more math, which makes me uncomfortable, but the table realizes Trevor has enough mana to pump his elves and make an attack that's big enough to take both Matt and Mike out, and they concede the game to him. So this was a pretty fun game, and I really enjoyed watching it and scripting it. There were 3 great combo-based decks, and considering this game was almost 2 years old, with the new additions to lands-based decks, it was fantastic to see how well Sean's deck performed before those cards were added to it. I'm sure many viewers are happy that Trevor didn't win with something like Triumph of the Hordes or Craterhoof Behemoth, and just got there with good old-fashioned Overrun from Azuri. I've probably said it a couple times at this point, but I think Mike's Olivia Mobilized for War is easily my favorite deck of his. In all of the games that he plays, he always seems to have just the right amount of discard and reanimate spells, and he always has some kind of threat going on. Unfortunately though, this also draws removal, and he and Matt were certainly quick to use theirs, although I think they probably should have saved a piece or two for later on. I think unfortunately for Matt, he really wasn't able to use the Scion all that well, and having to use his commander as a blocker is never what you want to be doing when you don't have mana open to transform it into something else. I'm not saying that block was wrong, because let's face it, Mike was probably going to hit some value off the Lord of the Void. It's just unfortunate that Matt was in that situation from the get-go. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta, and lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.